Welcome back, everyone, to the deep dive. We got a really interesting one today. We're going to be talking about pedestrian dynamics.
Yeah.
I know you've all been asking about it for a while now.
hmm
So we're talking about how people move in those like really crowded spaces.
hmm
Think like a busy train station or a packed concert.
Yeah, those are really interesting spaces to consider.
Right. Like, how do you even begin to like model something that seems so random?
Well, it's definitely a complex challenge.
I mean, everyone's got their own little quirks.
Oh
They're
yeah.
going in different directions, like a sea of people all trying to get somewhere.
Yeah, and everybody's moving differently.
Exactly. And you can't predict what any one person's going to do.
Right. So researchers have been using this thing called cellular automata
Okay.
or CA,
Okay.
and it's basically it's a way to model these complex systems.
Okay.
Think of it like a big grid,
Okay.
like a chessboard almost.
Okay, I can see that.
And each square on the grid is like a cell, right?
Mm.
And then you've got all these little, we call them agents,
Mm-hmm.
moving around on the board.
So each little agent is like a person.
Exactly. And you can program these agents with different rules, so they can only move to an adjacent cell if it's empty.
Right.
Or maybe they move faster if there's more space in front of them, things like that.
So it's basically like creating a little virtual crowd
Yeah.
and then seeing how they behave.
That's a great way to put it.
That's cool.
Yeah.
But I bet it gets really complicated when you're talking about really dense crowds.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
It gets much
Everyone's bumping into each other, right?
Oh, it's a huge challenge to model all those little interactions.
Yeah.
And, some people are more assertive.
Right. Some people are going to push.
Exactly. And others are more hesitant.
So how do you capture all of that?
Well, there's this really interesting paper we're going to look at
Yeah.
by a guy named Bezier and his team. And they've come up with a pretty innovative model
Okay.
that's particularly good at handling these high-density situations.
So this is like next level crowd simulation.
Yeah. It's building on previous work,
Okay.
but adding some really clever tweaks.
Okay. Well, I'm all ears. Like, what makes this Bezier model so special?
Well, one of the big things is how it represents the pedestrians on the grid.
Okay.
So, in traditional CA models, each person is like just a single cell,
Right.
just a little square. But Bezier's model allows pedestrians to occupy multiple cells.
Wait, so instead of being like a little block, they're like a more detailed shape.
Exactly. And as you increase the resolution of the grid,
Uh-huh.
you can get even more detailed representations of the pedestrian.
Oh, that's interesting. So it's like zooming in and seeing them more clearly.
Exactly.
Good.
And this might sound like a small change,
Right.
but it has a huge impact on how the model simulates movement.
Okay. In what way?
Well, so think about how people rotate in a crowd, right?
Right.
They're constantly turning.
Yeah, bumping into each other. Yeah.
Exactly. And in traditional models, when a pedestrian rotates, it can suddenly become like this thin line,
Right.
which isn't realistic at all.
Right. They don't just like shrink.
No. So Bezier's model addresses this with the concept of what they call a base square.
A base square.
Yeah. So it's the smallest square that can contain the entire pedestrian shape,
Okay.
no matter which way it's facing.
Oh, that's smart. So it kind of keeps them from turning into an unrealistic shape.
Exactly.
Okay, so that keeps the movements more realistic.
Right. But it's not just about the shapes.
Right, because there's more to a crowd than just like shapes moving around.
Exactly. There's this whole physicality to it.
Right. There's pushing, there's bumping.
But jostling.
Yeah, how does the model account for that?
Well, that's where things get really, really fascinating.
Okay, hit me.
So Bezier's model actually incorporates the idea of physical pressure
Okay.
using, and this is going to sound a little weird, but
All right, I'm ready.
they call them p-bosons.
P-bosons.
Yeah.
That's right.
So imagine these p-bosons.
Like a Star Wars thing?
Kind of. They're these tiny virtual particles that represent the force
Okay.
of one pedestrian pushing on another.
So when I bump into you in a crowd, I'm transferring some of my p-bosons to you.
Exactly. It's like a chain reaction.
Okay, I kind of get it.
So these p-bosons, they propagate through the crowd,
Mm-hmm.
and as they travel, they lose a little bit of their energy.
Okay.
It's like a real push would lose force.
Right. Right.
So it's really important, especially near bottlenecks.
Why near
Because
bottlenecks?
you've got all these, you've got all these people crowded together.
Right, right. So more p-bosons in a smaller space
Exactly.
makes it harder to move.
Exactly.
Wow, so they've thought about this whole, like, physicality aspect of
I
it.
have.
It's really cool.
But, this all sounds very theoretical.
Right.
So they actually put this model to the test.
They did. They like ran some experiments.
You did. Okay, tell me about it.
And this is where it gets really fun. So they got like 68 students together
Okay.
and had them simulate different crowd scenarios,
Okay.
and they actually filmed it.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so they set up like a narrow doorway
Okay.
as a bottleneck.
Right.
And they filmed the whole thing to see, how these students would actually move through this bottleneck.
Oh, that's cool. So, like, they're all just trying to get through the door as fast as they can.
Well, they tested a few different scenarios.
Okay.
So the first one was all about individual speed.
Okay.
So it was like every man for himself.
Okay.
Just get through the door as fast as you can.
Okay, so it's like a mad rush.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And then the second scenario, they focused on group speed.
Okay.
So it's like, imagine a sports team trying to enter a stadium.
They want to get everyone in as quickly as possible.
Right, working together.
Exactly. And then the third scenario was more like a free entry, just like a normal day, people moving at their own pace.
Okay, so 3 very different kinds of crowds.
Exactly.
So how do the models stack up? Like, did it actually predict how the students would move?
Well, that's what they wanted to find out, right? So they compared Bézier's model to the actual footage of the student experiments,
Okay.
but they also compared it to another earlier model.
Oh, okay.
Developed by a researcher named Bursted.
Okay.
So it was kind of like a crowd modeling showdown.
Right, to see which one is better.
Exactly.
Okay, well, who won?
Well, let's start with that first scenario.
Okay.
The every man for himself.
Okay, the mad dash.
Right. So one of the things they looked at was the transition time.
Okay.
Basically how long it took for all the students or all the agents in the model
Okay.
to pass through the bottleneck.
So, like, who cleared the doorway faster? The real students or the simulated ones?
Exactly. And what's interesting is that Bézier's model was consistently closer
Oh, really?
to the actual time it took the students.
Ah.
And in some cases, it was significantly faster than the older model.
Okay, so Bézier's is winning in terms of speed,
Mm-hmm.
but, like, did it look realistic? Like, did it show people bunching up or slowing down?
That's a great point. So they also analyzed the density fluctuations,
Okay.
meaning like, how crowded different areas got
Okay.
over time. And they used a couple of different methods to measure this.
Okay.
They used, the traditional density calculations, but they also used something called the Voronoi method.
The Voronoi method.
Yeah, it's a way to kind of measure how space is divided up
Okay.
within a crowd.
All right, so did it work?
What they found was that Bézier's model did a much better job of actually reflecting what they saw in those student experiments. So it was showing, people clustering together in certain areas.
Yeah.
And those clusters kind of shifting and changing over time.
So it was more like a real crowd, not just like a smooth flow.
Yeah, the older model just couldn't capture that same level of detail.
Okay, that's really interesting. So
Mhm.
it's not just about the speed, it's about like how it looks, how it feels.
That's exactly.
Okay, well, so far Bézier is 2 for 2.
Right. And they didn't stop there. They also looked at something called the cumulative flow,
Yeah.
which basically measures like the percentage of the crowd that's passed through the bottleneck.
Right, so instead of just the total time, it's like showing us the pace throughout the experiment.
Exactly.
Okay.
Then Bézier's model, again, lined up much more closely
Really?
with the real world data.
Wow.
So it was showing, these bursts and pauses in movement
Uh-huh.
that you see in a real crowd,
Mhm.
where people speed up and slow down and adjust to each other.
So it's not just about getting the right answer, it's about getting the right process, the right feeling.
Exactly. Yeah.
Wow, okay. So, but this was all just based on this like narrow doorway, right?
Yeah.
Like what if it was a wider space?
Well, they thought about that too.
Okay.
So they actually incorporated data from another experiment.
Okay.
This one was conducted by a team at the Jülich Supercomputing Center,
Okay.
or JSC.
Yeah, so.
And they looked at how people move through a much wider corridor,
Okay.
like 5.6 meters wide.
So not so much of a bottleneck.
Right, yeah.
Okay, and how did Bézier's model hold up?
Well, even with more space to move around, Bézier's model still performed better
Really?
than the older model. It was more consistent with the real-world data
Huh.
from this JSC experiment.
Okay, interesting. So what are the practical applications of all this? Like, why should we care about how accurately we can simulate a crowd?
Oh, there's tons of applications.
Okay, like what?
Well, think about designing a stadium or a train station. Right. You can use a model like Bayesier's
Uh-huh.
to test out different layouts and see how the crowd flow is going to be affected.
Right, so you can avoid bottlenecks before they happen.
Exactly.
Okay, that's pretty cool. What else?
Well, think about emergency situations,
Okay.
like a fire in a building.
Right.
You can use these models to simulate evacuation scenarios
Okay.
to find the safest and most efficient ways to get people out.
So this is literally life-saving stuff.
Yeah.
Wow. But it makes you wonder, though, like, if we can simulate crowds this well, does that mean that all human behavior is predictable?
Well, that's a big philosophical question.
Right.
I mean, these models are great at predicting physical movement,
Yeah.
but, human behavior is complex.
Right, it's not just about where we walk.
Exactly.
Yeah, there's emotions, there's, like, decision-making.
Right. And you can't always predict that,
Especially in, like, an emergency.
Exactly. And that's kind of, that's where the future of this research
Okay.
gets really exciting because, what if we could start to incorporate
Yeah.
like individual personality traits
Oh, wow.
or even the influence of social media?
So you could simulate, like, how a crowd reacts to a rumor online or how people with different levels of, like, anxiety would behave.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
We're still early stages, but
Yeah.
the possibilities are huge.
Yeah.
I mean, think about how this could change the way we design, public spaces or manage big events
Right.
or respond to disasters.
Yeah. It's really, really interesting stuff. And I mean, it's kind of amazing to think that something as like simple as how people walk
Mm-hmm.
can have such a big impact.
It is. And it just goes to show that sometimes, the most profound discoveries come from looking at those things that we take for granted.
Yeah.
Everyday life. Yeah, well said. So to wrap things up for everyone listening today, we've been talking about how researchers are using, really cool technology
Mm-hmm.
to simulate something that we all, experience every day, crowds. And we've seen how these simulations are getting incredibly accurate.
Yeah.
Even down to capturing those little details.
Those bursts and pauses.
Right.
Yeah.
And what's really exciting is that this isn't just like a theoretical thing.
No.
It has the potential to, to make our cities safer, our buildings more efficient,
Definitely.
our responses to emergencies more effective. It's really incredible stuff.
Yeah, it really is.
And it's just a reminder that, science isn't always about those big abstract concepts.
Right.
Sometimes it's about understanding the complexities of,
Everyday life.
everyday life. Exactly.
Yeah.
Like how we navigate a crowded room or a busy street. So if you're interested in learning more, keep diving, keep asking those questions. And we will see you next time.